is, why does God want us to be like fruit? And why does God have such a strong desire that we bear fruit? Well, I believe it's because of the qualities of fruit, because He wants me and you to live a life that is both good to others and good for others. In other words, He wants our lives to be tasty. He wants us to live lives that are so attractive that people will be drawn to us like a hungry man is to a plate of good food, and when he takes it, he finds it's not only good to him, it's good for him. I want you to turn to the book of Galatians. It's in the middle of the New Testament. Galatians chapter 5, and I want you to look in verses 22 and 23. Because these verses are going to be kind of the basis of what we're going to be studying over the next 9 weeks. Here's what Paul said. He said, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Now, by the way, the Greek word there for fruit is not plural, it's singular. It's not the fruits of the Spirit, it is the fruit of the Spirit. Because when you are dominated and you are controlled by the Holy Spirit of God, and by the way, for those of you who are unbelievers, when you give your heart and life to Jesus Christ, one of the benefits is God's Holy Spirit comes to live literally in you. He takes residence in you. And when the Holy Spirit takes residence in you, you will bear all 9 qualities, all 9 of these fruit in your life. Now, we're going to begin today, obviously, with the first fruit, which is love. And I think I know why Paul put love first. Matter of fact, I'm pretty convinced I know why. Because without love, you really won't bear any of the following 8 qualities. I mean, I'll give you just take 2 examples. If you're not really a loving person, you won't really be a joyful person. If you're not a loving person, you really won't be very patient with anybody, because you only be patient with yourself. And Paul knew something. Paul knew that all the other 8 qualities would flow out of a life of love. As a matter of fact, let me tell you how important love is. The Bible says a lawyer came to Jesus one time and he basically asked this question. He said, can you tell me of all the 613 commandments that are found in the Old Testament, which one is the more important? And Jesus said, oh, I can do better than that. I can summarize all 39 books of the Old Testament in one word. Somebody tell me, what was that word? Love. He said, take all those laws, I can boil them down to 2. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now that raises the question, all right, what does love look like? How does the fruit of love taste? How can a person show their love to others? And how can you make sure, without ever saying a word to anybody, other people know they are loved by you? And so what we're going to do today is we study this passage. We're going to have a love checkup. And we're going to measure our love by what Paul says love ought to be like in 1 Corinthians 13. And Paul says if you're really bearing the fruit of love in your life, he says in this chapter there will be 3 things that will be true about your life. So let's just do a little love checkup, okay? You want to fill in the blank? They're on the back of your order of service. Here's what we read. Number 1, Paul says if I'm a loving person, if you're a loving person, you will be motivated by love. Now listen to what he says in 1 Corinthians 13, beginning in verse 1. He says, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my body to the flames, but have not love, I gain nothing. I want to ask you a question. You think Paul's trying to make a point about love? That word love, by the way, that's used no fewer than 9 times in this chapter is a Greek word that a lot of us are familiar with. This is the word agape. Now, the interesting thing about that word is it's rarely found outside of the New Testament. It was not a common everyday word. As a matter of fact, the Greeks had primarily 2 different words they used for love. One was the word eros. Eros referred to the sexual love that you have between a man and a woman. The other kind of love, the other word that was used was the word philos. And that describes the affection between 2 friends, kind of like a brotherly love. Now, here's what those 2 loves have in common. Both eros and philos, both sexual love and friendly love or brotherly love, are somewhat dependent on the person that's being loved. So, for example, we tend to want to give affection or physical affection, or within the context of marriage, sexual love to someone that we're physically attracted to. And likewise, we tend to give friendly love to people that we want to be our friend, to people that we like. And by the way, the Bible has not called us to like everybody. Okay, let me make that plain. Okay, Will Rogers said, "I never met a man I didn't like." He never pastored a church. Okay, I'm telling you, you're not going to like everybody. We're to love everybody, not going to like everybody. Now, but the love that Paul talks about is totally different. This love is a love that is based on the deliberate choice of the one who's doing the loving, rather than on the worthiness of the person who's being loved. In other words, this is the kind of love that says, I'm going to love you whether you're lovable or not. I'm going to love you whether you love me back or not. I'm going to love you if I don't particularly find you somebody that's easy to love. And by the way, I'm going to love you whether you give me anything in return or not. And what Paul is saying here is, and this is so important, what Paul is telling us is, God is not impressed with what you do, and He's not impressed with how you do it nearly as much as He's wondering, why do you do it? Because if you look carefully at the first three verses, you may have missed this, but what Paul basically is listing here are spiritual gifts. If you go back and read 1 Corinthians 12 and then read 1 Corinthians 14, he's dealing primarily with spiritual gifts. So he says, all right, let's take all these people. Here's someone who has the gift of tongues. Here's someone who has the gift of prophecy. Here's someone who has the gift of knowledge. Here's someone who has the gift of faith. Here's someone who has the gift of giving. Here's someone who's even willing to give the gift of their own life. Paul says, big deal. The only thing that makes you anything is love. The only thing that makes you anything is love. There's no substitute for loving God, and there's no substitute for loving others. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you something kind of interesting. When you read that list in 1 Corinthians 13, 1 through 3, do you realize that every other religion in the world practices those very same things? There are pagan religions that practice speaking in tongues. There are other religions that claim to prophesy. Other religions have faith. Other religions practice giving to the poor. We certainly see how in other religions people are willing to give their lives for something that's not even true. And what Paul is saying is this: we're so impressed with spiritual gifts. God's not impressed with spiritual gifts. God's impressed with spiritual fruit. God says, I don't care if you can speak in tongues or not. I don't care if you can predict the future or not. I don't care if you give money to poor people or not. My question is, why do you do it? Are you motivated by love? The real mark of a follower of Jesus Christ is not activity, it's affection. And everything you do, everything, not most things, not the big things, everything you do for the church, everything you do for your family, everything you do for your friends, everything you do for other people, every single thing you do, even for your boss, it ought to be motivated out of love. Love for God, so you want to do your best and be your best. Love for others, so they can see you at your best. Paul says if you're really a loving person, everything you do will be motivated by love. Here's the second thing. He says you'll be marked by love. You won't just be motivated by love, you'll be marked by love. Now, Paul gets to the nitty-gritty of what love really looks like. He goes into such detail, he gives us 14 different characteristics of what a loving person is. Some describe positively, some describe negatively. Now, let me just be honest. Now it's going to get very uncomfortable. Now you're going to have to pad those elbows, because Paul's going to get very, very specific. And here's what I want you to do. As we go through this list, we're going to blow through them real quickly, but as we blow through this list of things that Paul talks about, I want you to ask yourself two questions every time I bring up a quality of love. Number one, how does my love measure up with this quality? I want you to grade your love. I really want you to say, okay, you thought you were a loving person when you walked in here. You thought you were a loving husband, a loving wife, a loving mom, a loving dad. Let's just see how your love really measures up. And then number two, how would the behavior of others around me change if my love included this? Now, there are some things that love practices, and there are some things that love prohibits. Let's get started. You ready? We're looking now in verse 4. Number one, love is patient. Love is patient. If you can imagine love as being a fleet of ships, he says the flagship of love is patience. By the way, the word patient is a very interesting word. It comes from two words. The word themia, which gives us the word thermometer, which means heat or passion. And the word macro, which is the opposite of micro, it means long. So what it literally means is love is long-tempered. Love has a long fuse. Love takes a long time to come to a boil. It takes real love a long time to get angry. It has a long fuse. But when it does get angry, it takes only a short time to get over it. It has a very short memory. Okay, how loving are you? Give yourself a grade. Here's the second one. Love is kind. Kindness is when you do something good for someone just out of the kindness of your heart. That word was even used to describe food that was tasty as well as healthy. Mark Twain once said, kindness is a language which the deaf can hear and the blind can see. Let me ask you a question. What is your kindness quotient? So what do you mean, what is my kindness quotient? Well, let me ask you a specific question. When is the last time you did something kind for someone in your family, or you did something kind for someone where you work, or you did something kind for someone in your neighborhood without anybody asking you to do it? You just did it out of the kindness of your heart. Now, how's your love measuring up? Third quality. Love does not envy. Now, this is huge. For some of you out there, you young people who are dating right now, getting into the dating scene, love isn't jealous. I made a promise to Teresa. You may think it's kind of weird. A couple of months from now, we'll be celebrating our 35th wedding anniversary. And when just before we got married, I sat her down and I said, I want to make a promise to you, and I promise you I'll never break this promise. The day you say I do, and the day I know we're one, I will never be jealous of you, ever. I won't worry about how other men look at you, how you look at other men. If a man comes up and puts his arm around you, I will not be jealous of you. Because I have seen firsthand, I know marriages that are just poisoned because one spouse is so jealous of another. Dr. James Dobson says, if you love something, set it free. If it comes back to you, it's yours. If it doesn't, it never was. Now, somebody else put it this way in a different version. If you love something, set it free. If it doesn't come back to you, track it down and beat it to death. Now, that's not love. Okay, that's not love. Envy and jealousy possesses. Real love releases. Let me tell you what that means. You ready for this? Real love is glad for the good that's in another person, and real love is glad for the good that comes to another person. Someone has wisely said, every time you turn green with envy, you're ripe for trouble. So now I ask you a question. How's your love holding up? All right, here's another one. Love is not proud. Now, I'll tell you why Paul put that in there. Sometimes it's not just hard to love someone who's more successful than you. Sometimes it's hard to love when you're more successful than them. Real love not only accepts other people when they're more successful, real love also accepts other people when they're less successful. How's your love doing? Here's another one. Love is not rude. Now, the word rude literally means shameful or disgraceful behavior, and I'm not going to elaborate here, but can I just kind of throw something out? This is kind of an aside. There is a love quality that I'm seeing less and less and less and less today in our society. I see it less in our homes. I see it less in our young people. I see it less in children. I see it less in teenagers. And I know it's old-fashioned, but I'll tell you, you know what one thing our society needs today? We just need some old-fashioned courtesy. I mean, I'm not hooked on this, but whatever happened to yes, sir, and no, sir? And whatever happened to yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am? Whatever happened to the guy opening the door for the girl? What happened to that? Somebody said the other day, if a man opens a car door for a woman, one of two things is new, the car or the woman. Love's not rude. Love doesn't cut in line. Love doesn't cut people short. Love doesn't cut people down. How's your love working out for you? Here's another one. Love's not self-seeking. If anything defines true love, it's this. Love is a selfish love. Love is the love that says, I'm going to love you before you love me. See, can we just be honest? We're just getting real honest here this morning. So often we'll look at somebody and we'll say, I love you. But when we say I love you, we don't really mean, now I made a commitment to place your needs above my needs. That's not what we really mean. What we really mean is, I love you because of what you do for me. I love you because you make me feel good. What you're doing right now is working for the person that I truly love the most, and that's me. And that's why I love you. Well, real love loves others for what we can give to them, not because of what we can get from them. I want to ask you, how's your love making it? Here's another one. Love is not easily angered. Now watch this. This is really healthy. It keeps no record of wrongs. How many of you are married to a spouse that when they get angry, they don't get hysterical, they get historical? You know what I'm talking about? Have you ever tried to help your spouse and point out a fault in them, and you do it with the best of intention? They go, well, let me tell you what you did back when Reagan was president. How do you remember that? I mean, he says, look, real love applies a lot of grace to every relationship. It leaves room for other people to make mistakes. By the way, that's an accounting term. I majored in accounting. That's an accounting term. And what it literally says is, love does not keep a ledger on somebody else's mistakes. Love doesn't hold a grudge. As I said before, it has a long fuse, but it has a short memory. In other words, love is very quick to forgive, and it's either quicker to forget. So is your love making the grade? Oh, it gets tougher. Look, listen to this. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. Now, what does that mean? Now, you talking about the tough part of love? Let me tell you this. When you really love someone, and someone really loves you, this is the acid test of a truly loving relationship. If you love them the way they ought to be loved, and if they love you the way you ought to be loved, you can tell them the truth about something in their life they need to hear, even if it's painful and not pleasant, and they will receive it. And they can tell you something about you and your life that you need to be confronted with that is not good or not helpful or not beneficial, and you will be able to receive it. I want to tell you something. If you've got a friend, a so-called friend, who cannot hear truth and will not receive truth, they are really not your friend. And if you've got a so-called friend who's not willing to tell you the truth when you need to hear the truth, they're not your friend. Now, here's what I want to ask you. Based on all those criteria, if you were to give your love a real grade right now, how would you grade your love? I'll bet you if you're like me, it wasn't as high as you thought it might be. And I know some of you are sitting there going, you mean love is all of that? Paul says that's exactly what love is. This is what it does, and this is what it doesn't do. Last thing. Paul says, you know, if you're motivated by love and you're marked by love, then you'll be mastered by love. I mean, love will absolutely dominate you. Now, Paul was looking for a ribbon to wrap around one of the sweetest paragraphs here in the Bible, so he closes with this verse. Look what he says here in this chapter. He says, love bears all things. I love this. This is so cool. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Now, it doesn't take a rocket science to figure out there's a word that's repeated 4 times in that verse. It's the word all. It's the Greek word panta. And you may not realize this, but you use that word almost every single day. For example, pantheism is the belief that God is in all things. A pantry is a cupboard where you can store all things. A panacea is a cure for all things. The word panta means all things. And what Paul is saying is this. Paul's saying, if you're really a loving person, here's what will be true about you. You're always looking for the good in somebody else. Real love's not negative. It's positive. It doesn't look over someone's faults, but it overlooks someone's fault. Now, that doesn't mean love is blind. If you don't think about love, love's not blind. Someone has well said, love is not blind. It sees more, not less, but because it sees more, it is willing to see less. Listen to how Paul wraps this up. Look in verse 8. Paul says it this way. It's pure and simple. Love never fails. I'm here to tell you, after pastoring 5 churches, traveled the world, met tons of people, there's not a truer verse in the Bible than that verse. There's a lot of other things that will fail. Love never fails. He says, if you love with the kind of love I'm talking about, if your love practices what it ought to practice, and if your love prohibits what it ought to prohibit, it will never fail. It won't fail in your marriage. It won't fail in your home. It won't fail in your work. And it won't fail in the church. No wonder Jesus said, by this shall all know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Now, love's just like glue. And what I mean by that is, love has the potential to create a bond in anything. Love can bond to marriage. Love can bond to friendship. Love can bond to partnership. Love can bond to church. Love can bond a country. Love can bond the world. But only when it's released from its container. We're living in a world that's absolutely starving for love. I mean, starving for it. The first fruit, Paul said, of a tasty life is love. And Paul said, the more you love, the tastier you'll be. So for the love of God and the love of others, may God's Spirit bear His love through us that moved Him to give His Son to us. And oh, by the way, John said, in this is love. Not that we first loved Him, but He first loved us and gave His Son for us. If you're still not quite sure what this love looks like, and maybe I just kind of missed it, maybe I didn't do a very good job, and if I didn't, I apologize, but if you're still not sure, then I want to leave you with this as you walk out the door in a moment. If you want to know what real love looks like, just look at the cross. Because everything that Paul talked about in 1 Corinthians 13 hung on a cross 2,000 years ago. Because the Son of God that died on that cross didn't have to die. And the Son of God that came to this earth didn't have to come. And the Son of God that loves all of us today loved us before we even thought about loving Him. And it's because He loved us that we can truly love Him and we can truly love others.
For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life. How great is your love!